Hello and welcome to the first video episode of Uncarcerated, the podcast. I'm Justin.
And I'm Taj.
It is awesome to be here in this incredible looking studio thing.
Yes, we've upgraded, man. We're moving up like the Jeffersons, bro.
We went from being distracted by the cats in my house.
Yes.
To having this whole thing to ourselves.
Well, let me tell you something. I don't have a complaint. It's been really a joyride for me, bro.
Yeah.
But it's wonderful to kind of get some new digs and feel like that we're moving up a little in the world.
I totally agree. I mean, this is the start of something really cool, I think. If you're interested in hearing what we've done in the past, the audio only versions of the podcast should be available the same time this drops.
Yes.
So that is something you'll be able to see. But here we are. How have you been doing, man?
Not too bad, man.
Yeah.
You know, first of all, staying busy. That's
Right.
probably the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And I think we're all still in this adjustment thing, man, with COVID and of course in terms of what we do here at Second Chance.
Yeah.
I'm chasing a lot of medical stuff. Finally going to get some eye surgery done pretty soon here on Monday. So, but I'm good, man.
Good.
How about yourself, bro?
Doing pretty well. You know, I'm working 40 hours a day, so about
bingo,
about as much as I can. But you know, this is sort of a great way to unwind for the week because I love doing this. And I love the work too, but the work's emotionally taxing. Hanging out with you is a good time. So.
Well, Fridays, I appreciate that, bro.
Yeah.
Fridays for me are the best day of the week, period, hands down. So yeah, absolutely, this is a great wind down, I think.
Beautiful. So let me ask you a question, Todd.
Okay.
Was your sentence fair?
Okay. That ain't the first time I heard that question. And I'm going to say what I said the last time. And I heard that question before. The last time I heard that question was in a parole board hearing that I had. And my answer then, and it is now, no.
Okay.
Except here, I'm going to say hell no, because, in front of the board, I got to be a...
It's not really how you want to talk to those guys.
But no, because in my particular case, I had taken a plea bargain that was kind of switched up at the last second for me.
Okay.
And the case itself was just really I was falsely accused.
Okay.
And so in the big scheme of things, when we talk about comparing sentences to the crime and et cetera, if it had been, I got a 4-year sentence. If I had got a 4-hour sentence, it would not have been fair, to be quite honest.
That makes sense. I mean, it's an interesting question in your case because you didn't do it.
Right.
Right.
The thing I think I took out of the experience was really understanding how messed up our criminal justice system really is. We really don't have an interest in actual justice in terms of the idea that we throw around a lot. It's just expediency. What we call judicial economics, and get them in one door and out the other as fast as possible.
One of my favorite highlights of this idea is that it's called Department of Corrections, right?
Right.
What kind of correcting is going on here, right?
Yeah.
It's punishment. It's almost exclusively punishment. There are some treatment programs, and there are some things that there are probably a lot of people who are trying to do the right thing by people who are incarcerated, but. No, it's punishment.
Absolutely. And we have this idea that crimes deserve punishment, which will then stop other crimes. And we haven't figured out how asinine that really is.
All you need to do is look at the spoiler. There is no link between the severity of punishment and the likelihood of somebody committing that crime.
Boom. Right.
None whatsoever.
Boom. Yeah, exactly.
I remember learning that and after I had done time in prison, and being like, well, of course not, right?
Right.
I mean, you could have told me that shooting heroin was going to potentially carries a life sentence, and I'd have been like, okay.
And where's that vein again?
It's not motivating me to change whatsoever.
Yeah.
Which sort of begs the question, why are we doing it like this? What's the upside? And of course, there is tremendous upside, just not for the guys who are going through the system.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, Justin, maybe, and this is just my sort of impression, I think we're beginning as a society and an American culture to ask that question a little bit more. I can tell you my particular experience. I am blessed to be on the Sentencing Reform Task Force here in Colorado.
Right.
And there have been a couple of conversations I have witnessed as we look at sentencing structure where people are saying, you know what, why are we doing this? You know, why do we have probation?
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute, what? We're really talking about the foundation of what we've established in terms of prison and punishment and the court system. And people are beginning to ask, why do we even have this, and do we even need it?
So what's the optimistic answer to that question, right? Like if we lived in like a utopian version of the society we live in right now, like what is the answer that like has sunshine and rainbows attached to it for like why the policing to court to prison system is the way it is?
Human stupidity.
I love that the closest we can get to a sunshine and rainbows answer is
yeah. Sorry. All right, let me give you a better answer, Justin. We have, I think in how our culture has evolved over probably the past 4 to 5 decades, lost the idea of compassion for your fellow man, for your neighbor.
Yeah.
Somehow the corporate bottom line has replaced, we've become faceless. And so the money has, the pursuit of money and happiness as we've defined it is much more important than treating somebody with kindness and doing something charitable for someone else. And because of that, that allows for us to, I mean, we all, look, any society wants to have a criminal justice system because there's going to be crime. We have to do something about it. But when you have a criminal justice system that is predicated on an absolute absence of compassion, then this is what you get.
It's how you end up with a system where the most disenfranchised before prison are the ones who are ending up inside there, right? Like, man, I have another thought. This is just a sort of a soundbite thing. That I had this thought where you're talking about corporations. Corporations are people as far as the law is concerned,
right?
But they behave like people with antisocial personality disorder, right?
Yes,
these are sociopaths,
straight narcissists.
Yes.
Like you have to, in order to be a corporation, you have to be an acute, mentally imbalanced narcissist,
right? And these are the people who, these people. I'm comfortable actually saying these people when talking about corporations.
Yes,
but I did catch that I said that. I mean, I don't even want to dive down the corporations are people rabbit hole right now because it's really not the focus of what we're talking about. But holy shit, is that insane? But like the compassion thing is huge. You're so right about this, right? And I'm totally guilty of this too. I don't know what's happened, but like I'm compassionate to people I recognize as my tribe pretty easily.
Right.
And in my case, I view those as like people I either agree with politically or people who are coming out of prison.
Okay.
That I find it very easy to be compassionate for, which makes this work pretty straightforward. But am I compassionate for the people I disagree with? No.
Not so much.
Not very easily.
Okay.
No, I mean, I find that really challenging. You know, when people hold views that I find repulsive. No, I really struggle to be compassionate there.
Right.
And I'm like advocating for compassion, so I can't even imagine how a lot of people would answer this question, I guess.
I think they would answer it in how you answered it. We got a lot of room to grow in terms of that. And we're all guilty in some way, shape, or form, I think.
Yeah.
The thing, though, Justin, for me is I think that when we talk about these virtues, the real definition of the virtue is in its extremity, in its extremeness.
Yeah.
Your compassion is only defined when you can be that to someone that you know nothing about, who has scared you before, who is different than you. That's when you have the true definition of that thing.
Yeah.
True charity is not that you would give something to somebody. Would you give the last thing that you had to somebody? So that's how I find, if I'm looking at a virtue, I tend to find that it's really meant to be tested in those areas where we're really the least comfortable.
This subject has so many like small things that like I want to just go down.
Oh, bro, we could do a whole other show, and me and you are prone for that.
Right.
We learned. Look, guys, me and Justin were doing this communications class, and we took it over. Just like here, you know, we're supposed to be in there as students and learning, and they asked us a question, and man, we took advantage of that, and all of a sudden it was like we were doing a whole new podcast.
Yeah, somebody actually accused us of that during the class.
Yeah, it could happen, bro. So I know how you feel. We could go very easily, take an idea and just create a whole new show on it. Absolutely.
Why don't we dive down? Let's actually ask an even bigger question.
Okay.
Totally related to this, but like, we talked about fair and about punishment. Like, why are we even punishing people for committing crimes?
Well, look, I'm going to go even further because there are some questions that are begged here, right? We talked about about something. Why do we have prisons?
Yeah.
And I asked you before, Justin, offline. I'm going to ask you again online.
Okay.
Can you imagine our society without a prison? What does it look like, Justin? If I said you woke up tomorrow and there ain't a prison, not one, what the hell does that look like?
That's a great question that I have answered before for you. It's hard to say, right? Because like we have to make we have to first I think understand why are we locking people up to begin with? Like what is the origin of our bloodthirst for incarceration?
Right.
And for frankly just arresting people and charging them with crimes to begin with. And I think that you and I kind of I think we're on the same page here that the origins of these things are the Jim Crow South.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, I certainly believe that. We can see historically how some of the first laws about incarceration and bail and the lack thereof were tied into the reaction of the South after the passage of the 13th Amendment and, of course, the establishment of the proclamation by Abraham Lincoln. Yeah. And that now these laws were passed to answer the new black question. And the answer ended up becoming what Michelle Alexander, who was an excellent author who wrote the book, New Jim Crow. That's the answer. Yeah. It created a new Jim Crow. And so what we have today, in my opinion, throughout the nation really is a residual or a consequence of what happened in the South.
So it's we're in the South. We're just after the end of the Civil War. I'm a white landowner. It's not a hard thing to imagine.
Right.
And I'm terrified that people are going to take my land and my things from me.
Absolutely.
So I pay a guy with a gun to police my property as I see it.
Right.
My way of life, really, is kind of what I'm trying to do here. And I tell this guy, here's $40 or what? That's probably way too much.
Yeah, $4.
Here's $4.
Yeah.
I'm going to need you to shoot everybody who isn't me and my family who comes near my property.
Yeah.
Does this guy get a badge?
Yes, he gets a badge. He gets a badge, and the badge that he gets is one that they take from an older job, the slave catchers.
Right, it's the same guy.
Yeah, it's the same guy.
He needs work now.
It's the same guy.
He's my cousin.
Yeah. And let's take it even further. You're a landowner, but the land that you own was an actual plantation that is now got cobwebs and dead trees on it because you didn't learn how to pick your own cotton.
Of course not.
But since someone comes to you and says, hey, let me buy your land and build a prison on it. Yeah. And then because we got these new laws about bail and loitering, the guys that we arrest, we'll put them back on the plantation to work.
They can work off that sentence.
Work off the bail money, work off the sentence, all of that. Yeah. And then here comes the state saying, hey, we noticed that. We'd like to contract with you, Justin, to get some labor from you.
Yeah. Well, I happen to have a bunch of people living here who don't have jobs.
Oh, really?
Really?
Oh, well, well, then let's make it easy. We'll pump in some money so you can feed them and all of that too. And you can make some money and we can make some money. And all of a sudden, the lumber industry is now jumping off in the South. Yeah. I always wondered, Justin, and this is, the thing is what we're talking about is this historical fact.
This is how it happened.
And many people have no idea about this. I remember Angola prison.
Yeah.
Hearing about it as one of the most notorious prisons in the country.
Right.
And at one point, as I got older, I wondered, I knew, wait, Angola is a country in Africa.
Yeah.
How did it, wonder why they're calling this prison Angola prison.
Gosh, I wonder.
And yeah, and it's a harrowing to understand, man, this is our history, our legacy.
Yeah.
And it is what we deal with even in Colorado, which is nowhere near Louisiana.
No.
But we have prisons. We have a prison complex.
Yeah.
And it is born out of the same ideas that we're going to lock up as many people that don't look like us.
Right.
Sequester them, store them somewhere.
Right.
And then hope that what we're doing is going to make us all safe.
Yeah. I love.
How's that worked out so far?
What a great punchline at the end, right?
How's it worked out for you so far, Justin, with your land?
Yeah, well, see, that's. I'm so glad you said make us safe, right? Because, like, I guess in that magical sunshine and rainbows land we were talking about, like, that is the goal,
right?
On paper, we'd like to be safe. We'd all like to be safe.
True, right?
But you know what? It turns out there's no link between locking more and more people up and being safer.
Oh, wait, you do say. You knocked me over with a feather,
I know, holy crap, what a fucking revelation here.
Well, they're going to kill you if you keep going around saying that because you're saying something revolutionary.
Right.
Because it is, it's ingrained in us, Justin. I personally don't know why we feel safer with locking more people up. Because I hear people who work in the industry, so to speak, that really talk about it in terms of safety. They talk about crime and punishment in terms of public safety. There's always this issue of public safety.
Right.
And I'm always tempted to pose to them what we're proposing. The idea of you will be more safe if you build less jails.
No, I mean, that's the thing. Like, let's say that, because you asked, what does a world without these prisons and things looks like? Well, I mean, we're probably going to have to be post-scarcity, right? Because, like, the truth is that, like, people commit crimes disproportionately if they're poor.
Okay.
Right. At least they're arrested for them more. Let me clarify. Right. And we can't get to post-scarcity in the planet we live in today. Well, we could get there. We're not going to in our lifetimes.
Okay.
Right? So there are always going to be the haves and the have-nots in the world as it exists right now, and unless we're going to dismantle capitalism, which is an option.
Yeah. Look. Tear it down.
You tried to get me there earlier, and I was like, no, I'm not going to say it. But yeah.
No, we have to.
But if we're not going to get there that way, if we're not going to all have everything we need, we're going to have a situation where people are desperate and are going to disproportionately commit crimes, right? Because, like, when you don't have shit, you don't feel like you belong because you see the fucking billboards that have the guy who looks like he probably makes enough money to pay his rent, and you don't. And you're surrounded by these images, you know? And so if you don't feel like you belong to society, like, the desire to, sign the social contract is pretty diminished.
Okay, let's talk about what you just said, Justin.
Yeah.
Belonging. Okay?
There we go.
Because I think that in our work, what I have observed, and I'm almost sure you agree, almost, but I think...
Sometimes the way I look throws you off.
Yeah. I think one of the keys to how we fight recidivism is we have to address the idea that we take people when we incarcerate them and we make them persona non grata.
Oh, yeah.
You said something before that I heard someone else say, attribute to you, which means it must have meant something. It must have been a good point. You said, and correct me if I misquote you, you said that the opposite of recidivism is belonging. And what do you mean by that?
I did say that. And we're going to dive right into that as soon as we reset our cameras.
Boom. So this is Intermission.
Intermission.
Yes, we're going to take a brief break. We would roll a Toyota commercial right about now, but we're not going to.
We'll be right back. So, before our break, we were talking about a sense of belonging, and we were talking about the history of incarceration. And so I want to share a story, if you're cool with that.
Absolutely, let's go.
Cool. So I was watching this TED Talk. Johan Hari, I think is the guy's name.
Okay.
And he told this story about the research that was done that, I'm sure you guys have heard of it. A rat's living in a cage. He's got a bottle of water, and it's full of cocaine. And he's got a bottle of water without cocaine in it. Rat drinks the cocaine water, dies. Like, just consumes cocaine until it dies. This leads to some pretty terrible conclusions about both rats and about cocaine and about people, if you want to extrapolate something from it. A study was done later with a rat paradise where there are lots of rats, multiple rats, cheese, wheels, toys, things to do, whatever rats are into, and water bottles, and also water bottles full of cocaine.
Okay.
And in rat paradise, the rats don't drink cocaine till they die. The rat belongs to a community of rats living in a great place, and the rats live happy lives, and they don't do the cocaine thing. That sense of belonging, the opposite of like recidivism, of committing crimes and all that stuff, like that sense of belonging is what those rats had, and it's what people who don't like commit crimes have.
Right.
I mean, like I used to hurt a lot of people. I'd steal from people, lie to people all the time, do stuff I didn't need to be doing. And I also didn't really feel like a part of anything.
Okay.
Okay. And when we send people to prison, all we're doing is doubling down on that message.
That they don't belong.
Fuck you, you don't belong here.
Right.
We're literally taking them out of society.
Right. Yeah, we're taking them out, Justin, and we are disinviting their return. And we don't expect them to. I tell many clients that I talk to who've gotten out, first I welcome them home, and I say, hey, hopefully we're going to keep you here. But I also, in telling them, when I talk about recidivism, I do tell them, I say, the sad thing is our society expects that when people go to prison and jail, that's where they stay. And if you get out, it's this amazing surprise, And it's a sad. I think it's a sad indication of our mindset.
We also expect them to go back.
Oh, yes.
Like over 50%, right? Is the national recidivism average for incarceration?
It's a coin toss. Great odds if you're playing the lottery. I mean, wonderful odds.
Right. Bad if it's your life.
Horrid if you're talking about will I go back to prison within 3 years? Yeah.
And I think that addressing this point that I think is the secret sauce is how Second Chance Center maintains a recidivism rate of below 5%.
Right.
It's not just. I know we started this conversation talking about whether your sentence is fair, whether we need to be punishing people or not. But the truth is, like, we live in this world.
Right.
And while I do want to destroy a bunch of the systems that exist.
Right.
We're not going to do that. We're not going to pull that off.
No. But Justin, tying back to the point that we're talking about now, though.
Yeah.
It was unfair in the sense of, in the scheme of I was accused falsely.
Yeah.
But that the idea of them feeling like I was guilty resulted in the decision to say, you no longer belong here.
Right.
Now, when I got sentenced, I was, 40 some years old,
Yeah.
I have worked in this country and culture and society, raised kids, owned a couple of houses, helped start a couple of business, worked, did some volunteer work and activism. I worked for 2 presidents.
Right.
How the hell are you going to tell me that based on your judgment, based on the insanity of our court system, that the result of my experience with you over the course of a few months, you're going to say, I don't belong here?
Yeah.
And so if you want to say, if I were to characterize what was unfair about it, that's really what was unfair, and not just in addition to the fact that it was a false charge,
right?
But it really was that you really concluded after all of this, my actual existence, because that's what's crazy.
All the
You're
people
telling people who exist, they literally exist. They're here in front of us. And we're literally telling them, nah, not really.
Right.
You know, you're not really here.
Right.
And there's no place for you.
You are less than me.
Yeah. It's insane, to be quite honest. And maybe it's part of, I hope that's the part that people maybe are waking up to. But there's so much going on in our society around this idea of belonging.
Right.
We know that one of the ways that ex-inmates are disenfranchised is, for example, through voting.
That's a great example, because we're what, 18 days away from
18. Yeah.
I know that people probably say this every 4 years, but it's probably the most important election of our lives.
Right.
And just recently, Colorado gave people on parole back the right to vote.
Right.
And people with a record here can vote. You can't even vote in some states if you're a felon. But yeah, imagine like being returned from prison, and then being like, yeah, you're never gonna be an American.
Right. True. Yeah. You really, you don't belong in this country.
Right. This fundamental, like America, like when you go around saying rah, rah, America, like one of the words in the next sentence probably is democracy.
Right.
You know, and like that requires participation.
Right.
And if you can't participate because of your record, like, are you a fucking American?
Right.
I would argue, like, not in whoever's eyes made that rule, that law at least.
Well, so then it's no different than being deported or being in a situation that could get you deported.
And in some ways, I mean, like, I don't want to say it's worse, but it's terrible in a very different way. I mean, like, you're surrounded every day by people who are more American than you. Like, why would you ever buy into this idea, this country?
Right.
Why would you ever participate fully if you're not allowed to participate in some of the most essential institutions?
And a lot of people actually, they buy into that. We don't belong. There is a huge debate, for example, in the African American community as to whether or not we should even be concerned about voting, that our vote doesn't count. Now, of course, we have the historic disenfranchisement about voting,
right?
And so that's there, but that also ties into with criminal justice, because if you go to prison, and African Americans have gone in droves, and as a result you lose your right to vote, then it's almost a repetition of the prior disenfranchisement that was in our Constitution.
Right, it's the same song, it's a different verse.
Right. Now, I have found it interesting, like Colorado did reinstate the ability for parolees to vote.
Right. That bill, by the way, signed.
Bam!
At Second Chance Center.
Yes. Right here in our offices. So we ain't just, we don't just deal with, people getting out of prison.
Right.
We're also doing a lot of work outside of these walls, in the halls of the Capitol building, sitting with our legislators and with our executive officers, such as our present governor, Mr. Jared Polis. I almost just created a name for him.
That's all right. That would have been you and him are so close.
I couldn't tell you what it was going to be.
It's
though.
just Jared, man.
I couldn't tell you what it was going to be. But we've been doing some really good work, and that's because, and I can tell you, it's because many of us who work here at Second Chance, who have done time, we have reclaimed that sense of belonging.
Yeah, that is absolutely it, right? Like, it takes a village, right? That's the saying, right? Like, and that means that it's not just the boots and the tools for the job. It's not just the job. It's not just the house. It's not just the car,
right?
And it's not just like the time that you earn on the weekend to watch The Sopranos or Survivor or whatever the fuck it is.
Right.
It's also like civic engagement. It's also like knowing that somebody's going to miss you if you're gone.
Yeah.
And here at Second Chance Center, we try to address all of these things because we remember. That's what I like to tell the guys. I mean, like, hey, I've just been out longer, dude.
That's it. Yeah. It's been interesting. One of our projects that we just did is a voter registration drive.
Right.
And it's been interesting to see that some of the volunteers who have gone out to actually sign people up to register to vote have been people who just got out of prison.
Right.
It's such an interesting thing to see that at some point they weren't even part of the conversation.
Right.
And yet these guys are out there helping to encourage people to exercise their right to participate and feel like they belong, right? Yeah. We know that historically the right to vote was tied to property ownership.
Yeah.
So the idea of property ownership is, of course, having a home, a place to call your own, a place that defines you. Your address is who you are.
Right.
In prison, it's your number.
Right.
Your prison number.
You don't even get a fucking name in prison.
Right. They just know you by your number.
If you're lucky, the CO will call you by your last name.
So many people knew me in prison, Justin. I did 7 years.
Yeah.
And they only knew me by my last name.
Right.
That was it.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. They didn't know. And fortunately, at least even the inmates, they all... Years later, I run into them, and I only know that I did time with them because I've changed my name actually since. But they refer to me as my old last name, and I'm like, oh yeah, I must have done some time with you.
Right. No, it's when you start stripping away the fundamentals of a person's identity, like even deeper than like taking away their civil rights.
Right.
Like when you start taking like their name from them, like that is the most dehumanizing thing you can do. You know?
Right.
Like. A person's name is like, oh God, I love names, you know? Like, my name's Justin. It's whatever. I'm named after a character from All My Children, as far as I'm aware.
Okay. I've been meaning to try to research that, see which one, man.
That's what my mom says.
I grew up watching that show, bro.
Yeah, well, you're about 11 or 12 years older than me, so it makes sense.
I'm going to find out, man. I'm going to find out. Watch.
So, but I don't really give a shit that it's Justin. What I care about is that like it's a symbol for everything that I am, right? And if you replace like that, the thing that I have ownership over, which is my own story, right? Like the legacy that I live and the things that I choose to communicate about who I am, what I'm doing, and what I'm about. Like it's worse than saying you don't matter. It's saying I define you, whoever the other person is.
Right.
You know, when it's 104-700, which was my name for a couple of years. Like, I don't get to define that. That you gave that to me and you sewed it on my shirt.
Right.
And so, like, everything that I stand for suddenly is insignificant because I've been assigned a new name.
Right.
And it stands for property of the state.
Right. It reminds me of the very harrowing, poignant scene in Roots where Kunta Kinte is whipped into accepting a name that's not, was not his. Right. And again, it's this ingrained idea that you, more so than the human dignity, but part of that is this expectation that you just, you don't belong here, wherever this is. Right. One of the most, to me, one of the most indignant indicators, signs of racism is when a person tells someone to go back to their own country. Yeah. It's very indignant as an African American because I hear it, hey, go back to Africa. Right. And I ain't from there. But it's just the idea that somehow this person thinks in their mind because of just what they see, because they don't necessarily know me as a person. Right. Based on what they see, they just don't think that I should even be here, that I live somewhere else, and that somehow I've been transplanted, and therefore the one thing that I should do to solve all the problems in the world is just go back to where I came from. Jesus. You know, I remember after 9/11, my then wife, who wore the Islamic headscarf, was walking with my daughter, who also wore it, and somebody yelled out at the truck, "Go back to your own country." And my wife said, "That's Texas." But I think this, when we talk about the secret sauce, right? Yeah. And so we always have to do a plug for Second Chance Center because, bro, I'm gonna be quite honest. What we do very well, and the numbers show, at least in the important numbers. But there's a secret sauce to it, and that is, I do think that what we've been ingrained with, from the executive director down to everyone who works here in any capacity, even our volunteers, is that we make people feel like they belong somewhere other than prison.
Right. I mean, like I said, it's the holistic approach.
Yeah.
It's the tools and the hug. No hugs right now, by the way.
Yeah.
Stay safe.
Coronavirus is surging.
But, it's all of that, right? Because when you feel like you belong, it creates a sense of accountability that is so often absent. Like, and I'm just speaking for myself. Using drugs is a lot less appealing when you feel like people would miss you.
Okay. Right.
I mean,
okay.
I would, for some reason, I never made that connection. Even though I was hurting people, like, it didn't really strike me as real until one day when it did, which was the last day I used.
Right.
And now I'm aware of it. And now I know people give a shit.
That's amazing. I had that same sort of experience, not with drugs, but when I got shot.
Yeah.
And when I just realized with all the outpouring of support that I'm expected to be somewhere and not in the hospital or not dead. Right. And that's an amazing feeling that you're, because I like to tell people, I don't expect you to be in prison. You don't belong there.
Right.
You belong here.
Yeah.
Wherever here is, it ain't there. Right. Right. But you belong here. And then whatever we can do, such as restoring your right to vote, getting you registered to vote, getting your ID, all of these things that we do as services, as things that we know ultimately say, hey, you belong here with us.
It's, when you come through the door here, you're recovering not just from whatever you went through before you went to prison, but you're recovering from the trauma of incarceration, right? You're recovering from being called by a number for years and being locked in a cage, right? And that's a lot to deal with, and it's almost impossible to articulate what that feels like to someone who hasn't been there.
Well, I think there's a bigger picture with that too, Justin. If we talk about crime, if we want to talk about what does it look like having no prison, because that means what the hell do we do when someone commits a crime?
Yeah.
And you've talked about it in terms of we can address it from the top end.
Yeah, exactly. There's systemic solutions.
And I believe that a person who feels like they belong, that they're expected, right? That when there's expectations of them to be accountable, to not do things. I can tell you for myself, my crime of choice, if you will, was to rob people.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I learned that people should expect from me that I don't harm them and steal their things. That epiphany was life-changing for me because I realized that just the simple respect for people to have the right to have their own property was an expectation put on me meant I can't do that anymore.
And when you were speaking, I was thinking about that expectation. Like, this is another one of those top end of the problem kind of things. There is this expectation that from a lot of society that a lot of people who look like you are going to commit crimes and go to prison in the first fucking place.
Of course.
Which, I mean...
sadly,
frequently people live up or down to their expectations.
Yeah.
It's not a mystery. If that's the narrative you hear, it's really easy to take that on as your story.
Right.
It's just... There are so many broken systems on the before prison end and in the prison end that seem insurmountable at times. But these small incremental gains in terms of like restoring voting rights for people on parole, they can have this ripple effect, right? Like if because I feel like I belong, I don't return to prison and I have children. And so I am then present for their lives. Like the chances that they go to prison are dramatically reduced versus if I had gone back.
Right.
And by setting those examples, we create this sort of like generational change, or we facilitate the change that individuals create that ideally starts to work out the system on the higher end as well.
Right.
Because when you've had these experiences and you have that increase of empathy, we started off talking about empathy. When you go through these things, it's really hard to not be a more empathetic person. I was a drug addict, but I behaved as if I was a narcissist because I was using drugs.
Right.
And I didn't give a shit about what I was doing really that much. And then I did. And then I started meeting people who were different than me in prison. frankly. I mean, that's where my eyes were open to a lot of this stuff.
Okay.
I was like, man, this guy's suffering just like me. And I really left prison with this sense of like, these are my brothers, you know, like they're in this shit with me. And I never, you know, I guess I had played team sports, but like that was the first time I actually felt like I was on a team. And I therefore went from then to college to Second Chance Center with this idea that my tribe could expand if I just listened to people.
Boom. Okay.
And when you increase that empathy, you start to be able to take policy positions, if you can engage yourself in the civic process, that help the people who aren't like you. And we all benefit because empathy is great.
Right. Yeah, it's a good ingredient to have. I had to throw it in the salad. What I think ultimately too, the people who have had maybe the indoctrination that they don't belong fight the hardest for those tools that put them back. The last people that really fought for the right to vote, in my recollection, were the people who had felonies.
Yeah.
The last great activism are those that have been amongst people who have had felonies.
That's
they
true.
fought for the right to vote. Imagine Florida. They are one of the last states that had disenfranchisement for felons. Imagine when the last election, when Florida, especially Miami, needed a few more votes for Hillary, had some of those people been able to vote because they would have had their rights restored. Well, and how that carries into other battleground states that might have, restricted the right to vote as well.
It's a huge change, and it kind of echoes back. I mean, we're going to wrap it up here in a second, but it kind of echoes back to something we were talking about, which is those guys in 1870,
right?
Who are like, well, we got to keep this from becoming a problem.
Right. Yeah.
It's the same guy. That's the same guy who passes the laws restricting voting.
Right now. Yeah, same guy. Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully, Justin, we see the wave that is building.
18 days.
Yeah. So it's a wonderful time to be alive in such a historic time, I believe. We've played a part.
That's true.
In it, a bigger part than we could have imagined where we came from. So it's going to be interesting to see where this thing takes us.
I totally agree. We've been all over the map today,
of course,
as usual. I think we're planning on wrapping up every episode by talking about like a little homework assignment, something that you can do to get more engaged or learn something about what we're talking about today. And we named dropped a book earlier, one of my favorite books. You want to talk briefly about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about the new Jim Crow, written by Michelle Alexander, who is an acting associate law professor herself. But just this, it is a seminal work about the criminal justice system from a historical standpoint to today, and how it ties in with slavery and how slavery never went away, but just sort of reinstituted and reincarnated itself in the justice system. Now, this might sound like a black issue, but in reality, though, incarceration is something that affects us all. And people of every race in this country. And so this book is a perfect snapshot, a very amazing historical treatise, about what has happened up until today. So highly recommended read.
Definitely. It's a great book. Check it out. In the meantime, you can find us at scccolorado.org. You can also look for Second Chance Center on Facebook. And we will be here next week.
Next week, we're going to do this one more time. Hey, I want to give a shout out to Sandra, who's running our cameras and our sound, man.
She's been doing
great. We wouldn't look and sound so good without her, man. Yeah. So I want to give a shout out to her. She's the invisible person that's helping us move this thing along.
Absolutely.
And we will be back again and see you. Please be peaceful. Stay safe.
Fucking vote, too.
Vote.